3 years on, this day brings untold memories for many Kenyans, and especially those that made it out of Westgate alive. Now, though the reopening of the mall symbolizes some form of normalcy, is this really a reality for the survivors of a Westgate attack? Well, to talk more about this, I am joined by Silas Kariinya, a counsellor and psychologist. Thank you for making time.
Thank you.
First question would be, do you think survivors of Westgate attack are in a better place psychologically?
That is quite difficulty to tell, but however, every time there is a traumatic experience, people recover differently. There are those who are able to recover naturally by themselves. There are those who get counseling or help quite early, but there are those who are not aware whether such help is there for them, and probably they could be still suffering from that traumatic event. Yeah.
All right. You mentioned reliving the trauma every time the anniversary comes, and some survivors would actually say even other attacks, whether within or without, makes them relive the trauma. Is reliving the trauma a sign that somebody has not healed, or is it a normal thing for somebody who's gone through a traumatic event?
It is a normal thing, because what happened is a traumatic event is an abnormal kind of an event. However, if the person, you are reliving the experiences, when you remember what happened, there are other emotions that are involved, then there's likelihood that that person has not recovered and is suffering from what we call PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, which has basically 3 levels. There is that reliving, there is avoidance, and also there is experiencing pain again when you remember what happened. And then there is a kind of intense arousal, like when Westgate is mentioned, just the name, then you start reliving the experience again. And basically you realize, for example, when you are talking about reliving, is whereby people are having like flashbacks, or probably you have nightmares. Or for example, if you're walking in the street and then somebody, maybe there's a flat tire, there's a tire burst, and for you it's not just a tire burst, it actually reminds you of the experience that you went through, and you can actually think that's another attack, and you react almost the same way you reacted when there was that attack. There is that state of helplessness, because you don't know where you are, you don't know whether is this an actual attack. Okay, so that really happens. And then, for example, when you are talking about arousal, whereby there is that intense arousal. For example, you're alert all the time. You're not able even to sleep at night. When you hear a knock, for you it's not just any other knock. A person who has not gone through trauma would just actually wake up and go and open the door comfortably, thinking this is a visitor. But somebody who has been through trauma, that knock at the door can mean actually is like there is another attack that is coming. It's like an imminent attack that is on the way. And therefore, such people, we really need to help them. We need to support them, these survivors. And just as we are talking about reliving the experience, once you go through a traumatic event, it is always important for us to understand, even the society, to understand that when you are talking about trauma, it is not the event that determines what is to be traumatic, but it's the interpretation, that individual interpretation of the experience of trauma. For example, let's say there are people who have gone through trauma before. For them, this traumatic experience is not just like any other person who has never been through a traumatic experience. For them, it's a reminder. And when we are talking about traumatic experience, then it's quite important for us also to understand that there are levels. There are certain levels or what we call categories that you need to see in an event, so that you can realize that this was a traumatic event. For example, you need to see whether there was sense of horror involved, or there is sense of, let's say, where your life is threatened. There's that sense of a severe injury. There is death also involved in the process. And there is that state of helplessness. So if that is what you have gone through, then that actually is a traumatic experience.
Okay, speaking of avoidance and interpretation of the traumatic event, there's some, even now on Facebook, Twitter, social media, some that are putting up pictures of who they were when the attack happened and who they are now, stories of victims to victors. And then there are those that literally packed and left, or would choose to do so, because everything that happens around the mall as it is today reminds them of that time. So is this person who says, I'd rather move away from the mall itself because it reminds me of that time, are we saying they are not in a good place, or are we saying it's their way of dealing with issues?
For them, it is the way they are dealing with the issue, but then that tells us, as psychologists, for example, that's an indicator already that this person is going through PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and therefore these people have not coped with the situation, or they are coping in a maladaptive way. They are not coping in the right way that they are supposed to cope. Because avoidance will only keep you away from the distance that you are not able to like go and assess them all again. But then you still live with the memories. You still live with the pain. You still live with the anger that comes with the traumatic experience. So even if you avoid the place, the memory is still there. So you are actually living now not in a physical manner, but you are living the same experience, but then you are living it in a, let's say, from psychological point of view. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the case of somebody who's gone through a traumatic event as this, there's a support system that works with them. What should that support system do to help along the healing process?
Now, one thing is, I think you've heard people saying, Westgate has been 3 years. Why are you still suffering? You know, people can usually say that because they don't know that any traumatic experience that happens in the life of a person has a subjective way of looking at interpreting that trauma. Okay, for example, let's say somebody had gone through divorce even the previous day, or you lost your husband, for example, the day before the attack. You know, this person, the mind was, it was in a psychological point that this person was experiencing a lot of pain. Okay, therefore, when there is another additional pain through the traumatic experience, particularly like we are talking about Westgate, then this person was not in the right place to undo whatever it is that happened. Okay, therefore, it is quite important for the members of the family or support system to understand that this person is just normal like any other person, but is reacting in a normal way, of course, but then reacting to a very abnormal situation. Therefore, there is need to know maybe what trauma is, to know how people with the trauma react. For example, you realize that, let's say somebody is your spouse and they become irritable. Something small really makes them so mad, if I can say so. Okay, now you need to realize that they are not mad naturally. They don't want to get angry naturally, but because they went through a situation that kind of formed their perception in a manner that they are not able to handle things like any other person. Therefore, it's quite important to understand them. That is the first thing. And the other thing, to understand what they are going through is normal. Okay, the feelings they are going through. Let's say, for example, somebody is not able to eat well, somebody is not able to sleep well, somebody is scared all the time, is afraid even of darkness and whatever. Now, you need to understand those people to realize that they have gone through a traumatic experience and they may need your support. So one thing is to assure them that you are there for them as long as they need you. So that even the moment that they react in what we would call a maladaptive way, you don't judge them. You don't start criticizing them. You actually assure them, I am here for you to support you through and through.
All right.
So that's the support that can really help them. And then after that, the members of the family, for example, or supporting group may require now to call in a psychologist who can come and provide therapy, not only now to the survivor, but also to the family members or to the support group, so that they all know what trauma is and what are likely indicators that somebody is going through a traumatic experience or somebody is going through PTSD. So they need to know all that so that they can know how to help them. Because some of them, you know, the moment you go through this traumatic experience, you realize that there are survivors who completely shut down in the sense that they don't want to be with people. They just want to be by themselves. There are people who have decided not to go to the market or to any mall. There are people who have decided that they don't want to interact with any crowd of people because that makes them feel insecure. Also, it makes them begin to remember what took place. Okay? So it's quite important to have a psychologist who can journey with them and help them understand. So that even when you are living with them, you don't just bang the door anyhowly, because that can actually take them back to the experience that they went through. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your time, Silas Kariinya.
You're welcome.
A counsellor and psychologist giving us a bit more information on how to deal with the trauma, because many are reliving that day today, depending on where somebody is in the healing process.